Welcome to Change by Design, the podcast where we shine a spotlight on engineering transformation. I'm your host, Chad Jackson, and each week we dive deep with leaders driving real change in the world of engineering. From breaking down barriers to challenging the status quo to fostering cultures of innovation and resilience, our guests share their journeys, lessons learned, and actionable insights to help you become the catalyst for positive change in your organization. Whether you're an engineer, an executive, or simply passionate about making a difference, you're in the right place. Get ready to be inspired, empowered, and equipped to engineer a better future, one change at a time. Branden Ramsey, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Definitely, get into systems engineering and hear, your perspective and experience. But before we get into that, I'd love, just for context, what's your career journey look like here? How did you get to this point? What was the background? Did you intend to always go into engineering and engineering management and leadership? I'd just love to hear about that part first.
No, for sure. So I did always intend to go into engineering, not so much in the leadership or management piece of the equation. I started out, I have a bachelor's in computer engineering, and then I did eventually go back and get a master's in technical management. But that was not how the journey intentionally started. I like to say that I messed up somewhere along the path and kind of solved a cross-functional problem by getting a whole group of people together to really just get myself unstuck. But once I did that, some of my leaders said, oh, I saw what you did there, and we would like to see some more of that type of thing. So that's where I steered wrong somewhere along this journey. And then I grew to absolutely love it. So it was never my plan to kind of be in the management type of role. I always kind of saw myself as an individual contributor, very much kind of a down and in type of person. But I really did start enjoying, I found those problems from that systems engineering background. I really saw these large organizational problems to be just another system, another challenge, right? Now it's unique in that it is people, which are not your ones and zeros that I was dealing with before. But definitely grew to absolutely love it. And so I really like solving these big, complex problems. That's what drew me to engineering in the first place. And I see that same kind of need and challenge even at the organizational level.
That's great. That's great. I always love hearing, stories like that. And understanding how people, you reach that point in your career where you're like, okay, technical track, managerial track. If you're that fortunate, to kind of be able to make that choice. If you were to, let's say you were advising someone that's at that decision point in their career, what advice would you give? Like, what are some clues that the engineering leadership and management track is not a good fit, and some clues and hints that it is a good track?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I have had to have those conversations both internally with myself, as well as others that I was advising kind of on those paths. And the way I break it down really comes down to that I don't feel that you could ever be an effective leader if you don't deeply care about people. You have to care deeply about their well-being, about their career growth, those kind of things. If that doesn't get you excited, then I would think you would find that leadership piece very challenging, because it is a challenging role. You're going to have a lot of sticky situations, uncomfortable, hard, difficult conversations. But the benefit of that is you get to see people grow, you get to see mature, you get to see them have wonderful careers that even if you played a small part in that, if that gets you excited, that's kind of the reward that you get for being in that leadership. And so if that doesn't sound exciting, then you will find that you are doing lots of difficult conversations. And even if you're seeing that career growth, if it isn't exciting you, you're missing out on that reward piece that I think that leadership comes. I think people are challenged with a lot of companies don't have a technical track that they could grow into that gave them some of the other areas they're looking for, which is just more breadth of technical scope and those types of things. And so I found
Yeah.
when companies do lay out those two tracks and give people those options, it really helps prevent people from feeling like, well, if I want to progress in my career, I have to do that people management leadership piece. If you give them those options, I think you find that you do allow people to kind of find where they fit best. Because some people do not want to do the people management piece. They definitely want to stay individual contributors. That's what gets them up in the morning, like love late night problems and stuff like that. Not so much the people piece of the equation. So giving them those options really kind of helps prevent organizations having some challenges in the future, putting the wrong people in the wrong roles.
Yeah. Great advice. I really like that. I think if you're listening on the podcast or watching the video, right there, I think that gets to the crux of how you make that decision. Really, really great insight. Let's shift gears. Let's talk about change agents.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about change agents in our research, our podcasts. And a question I always like to ask is, how do you define a change agent?
So that's a very good question because I think a lot of people have a lot of different definitions. So Branden Ramsey's personal opinion on that definition, I would say it is anyone leading a large change. And what I mean by large would be it touches multiple groups, multiple backgrounds, multiple kind of different pieces of either the system or as the org, right? Different teams and stuff. Because if you're talking about changing personally, that's a little bit easier in the sense that you kind of control all of the parameters and dynamics in that situation. When you talk about different groups, now you're bringing in different backgrounds. Each group has a different, responsibility to the org that they're looking out for, right? I like to use like safety or legal, right? They are there for a very particular purpose to make sure that those tasks are being met. And so when you have to cross into those orgs, you may find that the engineering speed that you might want to implement, right, might be met with, well, we need to make sure those other things are being taken care of. And that's by design. And so when I say a change, it comes from that. Are you crossing over those boundaries where you really have to do those kind of trade-offs at that system level?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, good. Good. I think that's a good definition. And that's aligned with what we've heard before. Okay, now, crucial question. Are you a change agent?
I would say
Do you
yes.
consider yourself?
By that definition, I do quite a bit of change that crosses quite a bit of domains, from safety to
Okay.
quality to design to budgets to legal, all of those types of things. Anytime you're implementing
Yeah.
any type of large system, I think you realize how much it touches. And so, yes, I've done quite a bit of that in the past.
Okay. All right. Good, good, good. Okay. So we actually have a research finding. I'm going to share it with you. I'd love to get your perspective on it. So in a study about change agents, we asked, what responsibilities do you fulfill? And change agent was one of those options. IT responsibilities was another one. Various design and development responsibilities, hardware, software, so on and so on.
Okay.
What we found, 91% of the people that identified as change agents also had IT responsibilities and design and development, or just change agent responsibilities with design and development responsibility. 91%. And I was a little surprised that there weren't more roles that were carved out and given space just to be a change agent alone.
Mhm.
Yet you see these responsibilities stacking on top of each other. So I'd love to get your perspective on that. Like, is that normal? Is that effective? What's your take?
No, so that's excellent. And I have found that to be the case too, that most organizations do not say, we're going to set aside a group or set aside a position that is just focused on change. In my background, it's always been, oh, you're familiar with this technology. Could you also lead the change through, right? And to some extent, that is
Mhm.
powerful, and it sounds like a really great combination. I mean, if you can give both, that's wonderful, right? You understand the deep technology piece. Can you do the change piece on top of it? But I think what you're kind of getting at is that, do you have enough hours in the day? Is that, do you have the right focus? Are you pushing too much on the technology piece? Are you making sure that the change management piece, the people piece of the equation is going in, proper communication? And I think what you are finding is that is one of the challenges. And I think it's pretty well known that a lot of change management doesn't succeed, that it's actually incredibly hard to get organizations to change, to really stick with it and not fall back and those types of things. And I think you are hitting at a very important part, which is, are we dedicating enough to just the change management piece? Are we making that a focus? And I think leadership has those challenges of, you've got resource constraints and those types of things. And so sometimes you say, can't you just do both? Right. But is that effective is a good question. So I think it can be. I'm sure if it was more dedicated, it could be more effective, probably greatly increase the chances of success.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right, good perspective for sure. Let's talk a little bit about the factors that affect success and resistance of change initiatives. Like, if you were to lay it out, what would be like the top 3 things? If you were advising another executive, like, hey, we're looking at systems engineering or revising our change process, release process, what would be the things? Okay, here are the top 3 things you really need to take into account before you walk down this path.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my suggestions is always, do you know your why? And sometimes people say, oh yeah, well, we want to be more efficient, right? But how much more efficient? And what are the problems you're experiencing now? Because if you don't know why you want to do the change, every change, comes a time where it gets very difficult. You're not able to articulate the reason why you cannot stay with the current path and why you must move to the other path for whatever reason, financial, schedule, whatever it is. If you cannot immediately articulate that, you are going to find that you waffle. You start to question whether this is worth it. You start to see budgets rolling. Things are slowing down because you're in the middle of change. And you don't know your why that you can immediately go back to articulate. You're going to struggle. You're going to waffle a little bit because it is going to get hard, right? So making sure you know where you want to go, but really, why do you have to do that change? Because that question is going to get asked from everybody in the organization that's experiencing it. And if you don't have that answer up front, it's going to get messy. 2, can the organization take the change? And what I mean by that is, if you have 45 change initiatives going on at a time, when we talked about that focus, do you actually have the bandwidth to be able to do this? It's going to, it's going to slow down in the short term, hopefully for that long-term gain that you have your defined why for. But are you doing too much? Because there is change fatigue, right? And then finally, assuming you've got those other 2 lined out, you have got to have the trust of your people, because it is a big leap of faith for them. You are asking them to change skills that they may have relied on for quite some time to feed their families, put them through college, whatever their case is, that these are skills they've gained, and they feel in some cases that might even be their identity a little bit. So, sorry, letting the jet pass over me. I don't know if you...
No problem.
Go
ahead.
Okay.
Continue
So
on.
I was going to say, so the challenge is that you are coming to those folks and saying, trust me, that not only is the company going to be better, but you will be better for it. And so a lot of times I really stress, these are the skills that the world are looking for, whether that be new software or whatever, in their position. So they are upskilling. They are not losing a skill that makes them valuable to not only the company, but to the outside world, right? That has to be clear, that they are going to be better for the change too, not just the company. Because if it's just the company, then they may weigh, well, do I need to be here? Because if it doesn't align with their goals and their long-term benefit, maybe this isn't the place for me. So it's very important that you understand why you're doing it. You have the capability and capacity to be able to dedicate time to it. And then finally, that there is a benefit for the people that are going through the change, because it's a lot of trust. And they are going to be slower than they used to be. It is a new process that they need to feel safe that you're not going to come and, I know I dumped this new process on you, but why aren't we moving at the same pace we were last week before we did? So it's a lot of that. To me, that is the secret sauce, is they have to trust you. And so where I've seen that go off the rails is if that trust isn't there to begin with, change becomes extremely difficult to move through.
Yeah. Great perspective. I love that. And, we use a little bit different terminology, but we're really closely aligned on that.
Okay.
So we usually talk about value, which I think is, your why, like what's the gain or benefit you're going to realize by doing this thing. We talk about risk. What's the risk of disruption either to the change initiative itself or your commitments around product development programs and projects. And the last thing, culture and leadership, do you have that trust? And this is a really great segue of how, the job leadership has to do in walking, doing the high wire act. I know lots of executives that acknowledge the fact that they need to change. The way they've been doing things might be a little outdated, and to be competitive, you have to go through a tough spot, but they also have made those commitments to delivering product development programs and projects. I'd love to get your perspective on how you balance those two things. And when are decisions clear? When are they unclear? And when do you say no even? I think there's not enough discussion around when people decline an initiative and say, right now, it's just not the right time.
No, I think that, and so I think to one of your questions, when is it unclear? I feel like it's always unclear. And what I mean by that is it's rarely like such a case of there's no one that's going to disagree with this change. We're going to move forward. The customer's totally okay with us slowing down or whatever those risks that you talked about. And if there is any risk, it's always a little bit of, is it worth it? Right. I think it is a challenging thing when you've made commitments, you've made timeline commitments, budgetary commitments, those types of things. When you do a change, you are usually not going to meet those goals that you made before them, right? You have to take those hours, that budget, that schedule from somewhere, right? And so I have found that it's very important to make sure that the people that you have made those commitments to are aware that those may change, right? And to lay out the most effective is if you can get your customer, your partner, whoever you made those to see the benefit of the change as well. So if it's a repeat customer, that's a little easier to say, guys, we're going to slip a little on this. We're going to come back stronger. Here's the benefit you get. We are faster turnaround. We are more efficient. We can pass on savings, those kind of things. Or if it's just a problem with, hey, this software is sunsetting, guys, there is a world where we're not able to move forward together because it is gone. And so bringing them into that solution space with you and saying, hey, this is the problem I'm seeing, and helping them to help solve it for you, right, with you. And so they might be able to say, hey, if you could wait a month, right, then that really lines up for our schedules. And so I think you kind of broaden that space, that solution space when you bring them in. I think the temptation a lot of times is to look internally, say this is an internal process, we're going to move through it. But I like when you do look at that external, what is this going to do to the customer piece of the equation?
Yeah.
And sometimes you can't. Sometimes you're like, guys, we're going to have to do this, but at least the notification that, hey, this is coming down, you're going to see a degradation in performance before you see that increase.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. What a great perspective. I really appreciate that. Another angle I want to look at this issue from is from a program perspective. You have a, very deep expertise in aerospace defense. Everything is a program, right?
Mhm.
And it can be a short program. It can be really long, decades long program. The behavior I've typically seen is the IT stack, the processes, the roles, that's usually defined up front at the start of the program. And lo and behold, it will not change through the life of the program. Yeah, I think we're reaching a point where, especially with new mandates from Department of Defense, wanting programs to be more agile, that these programs need to consider, okay, we do need to look at improvement and upgrades and change initiatives while we're executing the program. Do you have any color commentary on that? The challenge that's there and a good way to approach it?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And I have seen that too. And I think the world is realizing that because of how fast things are moving, I mean, we went from never having those generative AI capabilities to now there's a prompt engineer position to we have agentic AI agents running around doing things, right? Very, very rapidly, right? And think the world is now agile, kind of had a renaissance at one point, started in the software world. But I think it did not come out of there because, it was bored. It was an adaptation. Software itself can move very rapidly, can change very rapidly. And so agile principles came about just to keep our sanity of we're changing all the time. I don't have 2 years to write this code. Next month, the world's going to shift, the market's going to shift, and we got to be prepared to do that. I think hardware is starting to come to that realization too, as it becomes more mixed with software. Our mechanical systems, electrical systems, and software systems are becoming much more intertwined. And so I think we are now in that world where we realize everyone has to be faster. And so absolutely, the
Yeah.
preference was we're going to run this program for the next 5 years. We're going to pick the stack at the beginning. Change does cost, so let's keep it consistent. And then if we want to try something new, we'll try it on the next program. I don't think we any longer live in a world that will let you have 4 or 5 years before change happens. And
Yeah.
so I don't think you'll be able to survive long term being that static. You will have to be able to say, hey, in the year, we're going to need to swap these systems around in order to keep up competitively. And quite frankly, use the advantages that are out there. Generative AI that I was talking about can be a very powerful thing. Why would you want to wait 5 years before you start bringing in some of those advantages? Because there is a competitor out there that I can assure you is going to try that. And you don't want to be the one that says, well, in 5 years, I'm going to look into it. So it is a challenge and it's very much a shift for how things are done. And so when we were talking about that change agent piece, there's that. I mean, governments, NASA, who I worked with, DOD, those types of things, you're seeing that. You're starting to see that realization of we are not moving as fast as we would like to move, and the world is outpacing us from change coming from the world, new technologies, new those things that we've got to change our systems to be able to keep up with. The illustration I always use is just the complexity that is growing. In 2011, when the space shuttle retired, it had roughly 400,000 lines of code on it. Where you contrast a modern car today has 100 million lines of code. And so the world is getting more complex, not less. We've really lost that battle on the, keep it simple. The problems we're trying to solve now require complexity to solve them. And so we are going to have to figure out how to live in a world where we can live in complexity. We can change quickly with complexity. And so I think we're having to look at how do we do things across the board.
Yeah. What a great perspective. I really like that. And it's a great segue to our next kind of section on systems engineering.
Sure.
So I talked with the CTO of a business unit for a A&D contractor yesterday. And we were having this conversation about how they were struggling so hard to implement systems engineering kind of throughout, the engineering organization. First off, I'd love to get your perspective on, everybody has this impression when they look at aerospace and defense that, oh yeah, they're the most mature with systems engineering. They got it all figured out. It's like a check in the box, especially other industries from the outside looking in. I'd love to get your perspective and commentary on what is the real state of adoption there? Are organizations getting value?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. How you express it is, are they getting value? Because I would say that absolutely, your traditional aerospace companies, do systems engineering. They do it. They have a team of people that are dedicated, focused to accomplishing that goal. I think the challenge that they've often struggled with is it worth sometimes because of the current process, right? And so is there value in that, right? I think everyone agrees, yes, there is, right? It's very clear that systems engineering does provide value in theory. Now, in implementation, do you get sideways? Are you doing it to where it's causing a burden and that value is getting to reduce to the point where you say, am I winning in that cost benefit relationship?
Mm.
So aerospace absolutely does it. DoD as well. And I've been in new space and old space and seen kind of the mixture of the two. But I would say everybody's still struggling on how to do that perfectly. And by implication, do they understand the value that they're getting? They know it is value, but it is sometimes hard to quantify that. And it's also hard to
Yeah.
quantify, is it worth the cost? And so I think you get a lot of those questions even within the traditional aerospace of, well, how much systems engineering do we need to do? And the method in which we are doing it might be outdated or cumbersome. That's driving up our costs, right? And so we live in this environment where we really want to automate things. And so how do you do that from a systems engineering perspective, right? As opposed to creating those giant Word documents of, requirement that in a world that does change, we're finding that that is very difficult to keep up with. So I
Yeah.
think it's tied into previously when you had those long-term programs that were very stable, systems engineering, you had your waterfall, your V. It was a little easier to sustain that, to see that value. But now in a world where, hey, I want to make a real quick change, and you're met with, well, we got to go back and find all the Word document to update that. Now the question's being asked, is this worth it? And I think it's more because is systems engineering able to handle the rapid change that we're getting? So I think those two things are kind of bumping into each other. And so, like you said, absolutely, DoD aerospace is a long, long, long history in systems engineering, but I think it fit into a world that was a lot more static. And they're really starting to struggle in this new change environment with the old methods they were using.
Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head for sure. I think, um, even when you talked about complexity a moment ago, I think we certainly have reached the point where complexity of these programs, it's overwhelming. I mean,
Mhm.
no single person can keep track of it all. I mean, yeah, so I think there's a very, very clear need for it. Um, but you're right. The value that you get out of it, is it worth the effort? I think that is the equation you have to balance out. From a different perspective, obviously in aerospace defense, there's a whole bunch of new entrants, especially on the space side. You see it on the defense side. Um, and it's been really interesting to watch them. They look at the legacy primes and look at their practices and technologies and almost go, "Ah, that's the old school way. We're leaving that behind. We're not going to consider it." I'd love to get your perspective on systems engineering in the context of these new entrants. Is it seen as worth it? Is it something they're throwing aside? How are they managing complexity? Do you have a perspective there? I'd love to get that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it comes down to when people hear systems engineering, especially from the traditional aerospace, they think Word documents, giant rigor, a lot of design up front that you feel is going to be finalized. You're moving through these giant milestones as you laboriously move to the end, and then you're going to build exactly what you said you were going to build. Now, even we know that that's not the world that it ever lived in. But again, when we were talking about those long programs, that is how they operated. And they had that time, budget to be able to eventually get there. And so what I will say about that method is it was very, you will eventually get there, right? And that systems engineering rigor is what was doing it. What you see in that new space is a little bit of a rejection of that because they say, hey, we want to be agile. And so we do not want to say the design is completely finished up front and we're going to progress all the way to the end. We want to learn, we want to adapt. Maybe new products come in midway through the cycle. We want to pull those in. And so a little bit of rejection of that. Oh, well, the way systems engineering was being done, we may not want to do systems engineering. But what I found with many of them is they come back to it because they need it. Because at the end of the day, if you tell everyone to go build a part of the car, but there's no integrated plan, you're going to end up with 3 wheels and, all these different axles and, it won't come together. And so I think you will see a lot of aerospace companies start off when they're new entry in we're just going to do engineering. We don't need the systems engineering piece of the equation. And then you find the need of, oh, no, we do, right? I think what you're finding, at least in SpaceX's world, they do a really good job of that, is they really start breeding systems engineering is everyone's responsibility. And so I think that is a shift from the way that it was typically done in traditional aerospace, where you had a systems engineering team and you had, subsystems, and they would kind of hand things over. I think what you're seeing is people move all the way through those cycles. I did a stint in oil and gas, and that was how we were set up as well. And so as an engineer, I would move completely through the life cycle. We were always told at the end of the day, we're all systems engineers. If you're making a board, you are taking other people's systems and you're combining those into a larger system. And you are going to hand that off to somebody else that takes several boards that are being created within the company. And they're going to create a system with that, and so on and so on, as it moves up the chain. And so it really got that kind of focus to be able to say, we're responsible all the way through the system. And at the end of the day, my system is going to interface with somebody else's systems. And I think where people really started to kind of land is traditionally requirements were kind of the key. Everyone would look to the requirements. And in traditional aerospace, it got mixed in with a little bit of contract. It uses that shall and should language for a reason. I think when you own the requirements, at least the experience I've seen where it works best is that they're really just commitments to the stakeholder, and you can keep those a lot higher level. And what that does is allow you a lot more freedom to be able to solve that problem. But what it does cause the rigor on is interfaces. Interfaces become extremely important the more you push that decision authority down in order to move quickly. Is that if I said I was going to deliver you this much voltage, it has to be that much voltage. Now, whatever I do with that internally to give you that, as long as it's not changing what you're connecting to, then we're good. And so I have seen that movement. They're calling it agile systems engineering. There's a couple of things out there where they're really trying to figure out, how can we move fast? How can we push decision authority down? But it all has to integrate at the top. And what they're really stressing is those integrations have to be very, very tight. And so you can build your board however you want to build it, but it's got to fit within this. It's got to have this mass. It's got to have these connectors, those kind of things, so that you can change things. You know what you can change as long as it doesn't affect an interface.
Yeah. All right. I mean, that's a really good insight, especially in how it is changing the industry. I think those new entrants are definitely shaking things up. They're affecting those primes, those legacy primes, and forcing them to change and adapt, which is pretty fascinating. So another bit of research I'd like to get your perspective on. So we've run a couple studies. One is on general change initiatives, and we asked a question: what are your biggest problems? It was an open field question, meaning you could type in whatever you want. So we're not introducing a lot of bias there. And we used AI to analyze the results and kind of categorize it. Well, the top issue that people cited as the biggest problem with change initiatives is people, around over 40%, a little over 40%. And in the systems engineering one, an MBSE one, it was around 40%. So the top one was the same. But the second one for systems engineering was learning curve and training. And I think that speaks a little bit to the complexity of systems engineering. I saw a LinkedIn post this morning. I can't remember who posted it, but they said that the documentation for SysML, or maybe it's from Nkosi, but it was basically around 1,300 pages of documentation. So a lot of complexity there. And obviously that can be difficult for the people side of things and
Right.
adapting to such a large, complex change. Can you talk about that a little bit? The kind of the unique challenge around complexity with MBSE, because it is so different. It's not like 3D CAD. It's not like ECAD. Yeah, love to get your perspective.
Yeah. So, it is a challenge. I've been involved in the kind of the SysML stuff since the beginning, and my computer background, it was UML when it kind of started out.
Yeah.
We didn't have the
Yeah.
fancy tools. We were just drawing black diagrams. And what we found was there was another instance of our block diagrams never matched our code. Our code continued to move too fast. And so at some point you realize, well, this thing's so outdated, right? What are we doing, right? Um, I think the challenge for the systems engineering piece is all of the stuff that we've talked about to point, the complexity, the speed of execution, that kind of thing. I think it's also kind of a right brain, left brain kind of concept that's difficult a lot of times for engineers because it is ambiguous. What do you model? At what level do you stop modeling in detail to give yourself flexibility in the future, but still make sure that your model will catch things and that they change or find those impacts? And so what I've seen is it's a struggle from folks that are extremely good at logical, sequential thinking. Give me the formula, let's go do it. And I found SysML to be challenging in that because there isn't a one size fits formula. I believe it's why that documentation is so large is because it's, well, if it's this, you should do this. If it's this, you should do this. You should watch. There's so many kind of puts and takes that you have to juggle that it becomes a challenge. It's a what if scenario. One of the questions we used to get from young engineers was, in project management, is it quality? Is it cost? Or is it schedule that I need to prioritize? And the answer is yes. And so I think it's that kind of challenge of it's very difficult to say this is exactly what we want. And if they go to their leadership, they're going to be fuzzy on what it is too. And so I think it is an excellent tool. I think we sometimes get trapped on making it too perfect. I think we sometimes get trapped on trying to model everything so that we know everything.
Yeah.
When that becomes very difficult to upkeep in that kind of complex and fast move case. And so where I've found success in that is keeping it a little more high level. Like we talked about those interfaces early on. Can I say, maybe I know the mass overall, but I don't know the mass down to the resistor, right? Because if I model it down there, then every time a resistor's changed, there's a change process, there's an update, there's all that kind of. But that's very hard to convey on what you're looking for. If I'm an engineer and I'm coming in, I know I need to track mass, but at what level? And the answer really is, it depends. How much change do you think you're going to have? Because you're going to have a lot of change. Can we move it up a level and just say, we're in this bounds here? There's also a challenge with new product development and sustaining. I think some folks come from a sustaining environment, in which case I might want to model all the way down to the resistor. If I have a space station I'm keeping running, then I want to know anytime something changes, what kind of implication that has to my space station overall. Because there's risk. If I get that resistor wrong, bring down a space station, that's a very bad day for everyone. However, if I'm in new product development and I get the resistor wrong, and I'm in early testing, and I've burned a board, right? And so I think the other challenge is really kind of encapsulating when you want what level of rigor in that life cycle. And I think the challenge is a lot of times when SysML is rolled out or systems engineering, we jump all the way to one end or the other, right? It's too ambiguous and it never tightens, or it's way too rigid at the beginning. And I think that's where you're seeing a lot of new space folks struggle is they get there over time that they need that rigor. They know they're going to need it in a sustaining environment, and they might start off and even be able to survive in that new product development for a while. But eventually they're going to run into problem with integration and those kind of things. And so
Mhm.
it's an incredibly tough topic to train because it is complex. You're dealing with a lot of complexity, a lot of different systems, and there's not a lot of one size fits all answers. And so I think it adds to that of it depends is a lot of the answers that you get. And so it's a little bit of
Yeah.
art mixed with science. And sometimes that's incredibly difficult to come up with.
Yeah. Yeah. Great points. Great points. And yeah, you made me think a little bit, and we'll dive more into the MBSE side of things, the
Mhm.
modeling side of things. But from a process perspective, traditionally I've seen systems engineers do a lot of heavy lifting up front around the architecture,
Mhm.
define those interfaces, define those requirements, and then it's thrown over the wall,
Mhm.
and it's a contract for all the subsystem teams, and it is pretty inflexible from that point forward. And what I heard, I think some of what you implied there is that instead, what could happen is the systems model can be um, not modeled down to the resistor level in development. Maybe it matures and gets more detailed as you move along. But also, I think there's a missed opportunity around using an MBSE model to do trade studies. Like this
Mhm.
team's light on mass. Cool. Hey, can this team over here use it instead? And those
Right.
requirements actually change in the midst of the program. So
Right.
I love, can you contrast maybe the way that a systems model has been used, traditionally and where it needs to go to serve modern needs?
Yeah, so you hit on it, and that's the challenge is the lighter I make that systems model at the top, like I'm not getting that resistor level, then I lose that feedback of when that resistor changes, what does it do to my system? Because it's not modeled, right? And so if everybody were to wake up one day and all change resistors, for instance, my mass may go through the roof, right? That everyone went
Oh,
one way, even though those were small incremental changes, it may completely blow up my system. So if I'm not tracking
yeah,
that, there's the temptation of, well what's going to happen, right? And so I
yeah,
think that that is the challenge is where do you have that detail? What risk are you willing to associate that you might find out later? What I found in new product development, maths is always a problem. And it's not usually your resistors that you're having to shave mass from
yes,
early on
yeah,
in the system. You may get there later on in that development cycle. And so it's really that. It's really, and Agile kind of embraces that too. You've got more that you could possibly get done. It's really prioritization. And to your point, you may decide that there is a particular part of the system that I do want to model pretty in depth here. Where
yeah,
another part of the system, I'm okay with that being kind of wild, loosey goosey for right now. And what I was talking about earlier, that's really what people are trying to figure out is
yeah,
we're trying to get away from that one size fits all. We're doing requirements today. Everybody write all your requirements that you could possibly need. And now it's locked. And now we're moving to this one. We're trying to get to
mhm,
the point where we say, we're going to write a really vague requirement here to let you guys play in that space. And I'm going to write a
mhm,
really tight requirement here. And it's really that kind of push and take and those kind of things. And like you said, it traditionally speaking, requirements were contract based. They were going through subcontractors. And so changing them, it did mean a lot of money back and forth. If you are your own company building those things, requirements should be a lot more flexible. You're really just looking, hey, what's the best thing that we could do? Let's keep it light
mhm,
unless we need to tighten it. And so that's the challenge is I think we're in the midst of kind of toggling back and forth and different companies are doing it. We're too tight, too loose, too lit, right? And I think the real answer is you're going to need both and you're going to be really tight in some areas and really loose in others, depending on where you are in the whole system. And it's going to change over time. And that's why I was saying it's a terrible answer because people want to know what should I do? And the answer is, I don't know. It depends. And that is the
right,
frustrating. And I think why it's such a difficult question to answer and why systems engineering is particular is difficult is because those are the levers that you want to pull. You do want to leave freedom where you can have freedom. You want to keep it tight where you don't want it to change. But I don't think you can do that overall and say, we are in, you can change things for the next 6 months, but then after that, it's going to be tight. I think it's going to be more,
Yeah.
this system can change things for the next 6 months, then it has to be tight. This system, we're going to leave open for quite some time.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really interesting. Yeah. Fascinating perspective. If this wasn't an issue, we wouldn't be talking about it, frankly,
Absolutely.
right? That's why it continues to be a hot button issue
Yeah.
in a lot of companies and a lot of industries for sure. We earlier in this conversation we talked about the why, and really speaking to kind of business value, and we certainly talked about managing complexity or dealing with complexity or getting your arms around it. But if you're going to be adopting MBSE and systems engineering, um, what how does the benefit of that manifest in like business outcomes?
Right.
Speed, money. Love to get your perspective there.
Absolutely. So I have been a little wishy-washy on this, but I will say that there is no question the values there, right? That we need to do systems engineering, right? Study after study
Yeah.
has shown when it is done properly, you save immensely, right? But it is one of those things like diet and exercise. It's painful at the beginning, but the long-term
Right.
benefits are unquestioned, right? And so what does
Yeah.
that look like in the details? That's the challenge. I think most people realize that you gotta have it. It's just a question of, are we getting too much into cost versus benefit? I don't think from a dollar to dollar standpoint, any dollar you spend in systems engineering, I think you are going to get a return on that. Will you
Okay.
get as much return as you would hope? Maybe not. But I don't think it's one of those things where I must have it because it's a necessary evil. There is absolutely financial benefit to it. In the old system where we defined everything up front and then we went to the end, in the end, all that work that we were doing to define up front saved time in the end. That was unquestioned, right? And when you make a change late in a life cycle, regardless of whether you're doing agile or waterfall, it's costly. It's immensely costly to change anything after you've rolled out for launch, right?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
cost is just egregious. So you want to find those things earlier. So that's what systems engineering allows you the ability to do. In the software world, it was basically considered test-driven development, right? It's the
Mm-hmm.
same in model based systems engineering. You want to test your assumptions where you can, where you feel like that effort of return is going to be there earlier, right? And so it's an opportunity rather than having to go build hardware and even test it that way, to be able to
Mm-hmm.
say, let's model something up and see what we've got, what we can toggle back and forth and see if there's a benefit here, those kind of things. Again, I think you have to be judicious on where you do that. I think blanket
Yeah.
statements saying we're going to model it everywhere, that's what really hurts your return. But I don't think there's any question that you absolutely get a return on finding those answers faster than waiting later in the life cycle. And that's really the goal is anything you're doing with that systems engineering piece, what am I catching early that would have cost me? Every
Mm-hmm.
time you catch something early due to systems engineering, that's a massive benefit, a massive return. Even if you are upside down on the number of hours you're spending to catch one or two things, it's massive. And so we always use some kind of formula on like what does it cost to catch it this late in the life cycle versus up here, and use some
Yeah.
kind of. So if you're finding bugs, if you're finding issues, that's where you have to say, hey, this is the value we're generating because had this been caught later on downstream, these are the kind of ramifications. And those downstream add up extremely quickly. We
Yeah.
all know of like some, classic engineering blunders and stuff like that, from units being mismatched to, cables being too short on airlines and those kind of things that if
Yeah.
that had been
Yeah.
caught earlier, you're talking billions in savings, which covers your systems engineering for quite some time. So
Yeah, I completely agree. Okay, so we talked about value. Let's take a second to talk about risks.
Mhm.
So if engineering leaders staring down the barrel of a decision for
Mhm.
systems engineering at MBSE, what are some red flags? Like, hey, you should hold off, or you need to mitigate some risks through some, different approaches. What are some green flags that, like, hey, your org is ready to go with this, move forward?
So I think it's a lot of what we talked about earlier with the change management. I think it's those same questions. Where I usually ask people are the questions that MBSE kind of provide. Do you have a mechanism? If I came to you and said, I want to make a major change in the design, how long would it take you to feel comfortable to make that decision? Right? What system do you have in place right now? And it could be we call everybody into the room and everybody knows the system real deeply, and we could make. Once you start getting out of bed with that and say, I have no idea how we would make that decision, that's an
Yeah.
immense risk that you're taking on, and maybe a time that, hey, we need to really get started on whatever that looks like. And again, doesn't mean full MBSE, but maybe it means you're modeling something, those kind of things. And so it's really that risk assessment from a, what is it like if I don't have this? Do I have systems in place that
Mhm.
can handle it? Maybe it's small enough, maybe it's early on enough, those types of things. But at some point, you're going to need a system that you want to change something. And as a leader, do you have a mechanism to give you the information you're looking for to be able to say, I can confidently make that? Or is it one of those where you are in a situation where you're like, well, I have to make a decision. I'm going to make one, but I have no idea what this thing's going to do. And I think most people find themselves in that latter category eventually where they say, I'm making decisions. I have some information. I may know what it does from a budget standpoint. I may know what it does from a schedule standpoint, but very few can say they know what it does from a design standpoint. And so,
Yeah.
how do you test your people? And not like in a sense that you don't trust them, but when you have two experts that you respect in their fields telling you, I think this is going to happen and I think this is going to happen. How do you, as a leader, have a system that you could say, okay, I feel like the data is leading me here? Those
Mhm.
are the questions I usually ask people. And if they're at that
Yeah.
point where they're like, I do not have a system or I'm worried that we're going to get there really quickly, then that would be a time where, again, you need to establish that why, and that's your why. You're probably going to need to start on that journey to some.
Great. Good guidance there. Couple more questions. Second to last here. Is SysML 2.0 that big a deal? There's a lot of discussions around it online, a lot of excitement.
Yeah.
Um, does it make sense for organizations to shift or make the change from one to the other? Because there is a lot of legacy models in the older version, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
would love to get
So
your perspective.
yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be like anything that comes out. It's yet to be seen to some extent. But I will say, if the momentum picks up in that way, you will be left behind if you are not doing that. You will have to judge on your org what your timetable needs to be to shift. But one of the things from a computer background that I find incredible is that standardization that they now put in that 2.0 is very
Mhm.
powerful when it comes to your data analytics piece, being able to potentially leverage things like AI because that standard is gotten real tight to where it's very computer friendly. And so as we move into that world where the complexity is outpacing our human capability of being able to understand it, this is an opportunity where you can really start leveraging these things because it is very computer friendly as a format.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff. All right. Last question. As
Mhm.
always, if you could redesign anything in the world, what would it be and why would you do it? Even if it's the better mousetrap.
Oh, okay. No, good question. So I'm a space guy, and I have even taken a whack at this, but space stations are always very cool, and so that is a very complex, fun problem. Lots of lessons learned from the original one. So what would those improvements look like, kind of in that next phase? Whether it's floating around the moon or floating around Mars, potentially. What does that look like? What are those improvements? Some creature comforts that would be nice to add in there. I don't know if
Oh,
everybody's
nice.
aware that being an astronaut is pretty tough up there. It's not the easiest environment, and so bringing kind of some of those creature comforts up there would be a really cool problem to try to solve. Very hard problem, but very
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Well, Branden Ramsey, thanks so much for your time today. Love the guidance that you shared. I think listeners are going to find it immensely valuable.
It was an absolute pleasure, and I really appreciate the opportunity.